5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
You're listening to Tabletop and Beyond with your host, Justin.
But before we get started, how was your Geek Week?
And co-hosts Dan and Jason.
You have to be willing to let the dice help you tell the story.
Okay, look, this year I'm going to stop mispronouncing words. Join us as we cover board games to war games and beyond.
Hey guys, I know, we'll get back to the show in just a minute, but I wanted to be the first one to make a big, exciting announcement. Tabletop and Beyond now has our first official sponsor, the Baron of Dice. I know you've seen his stuff around, as all the best players use his perfectly crafted resin dice to make those perfect rolls. These aren't your dad's cheap acrylic dice, no. These 100% customizable dice have the look and feel that will make you a rock star at the gaming table. Customization not your thing? No problem. Baron of Dice has something for every need. Wargaming, skirmish games, RPGs, etc. You can have whatever you need. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.baronofdice.com and use promo code TABLETOPANDBEYOND to get a discount on every purchase. Now back to the show. And welcome back to Tabletop and Beyond. This is the winning Warcry segment. I'm excited about this one, boys. It's the Nova Open recap.
Yep. Should be good times.
It will be good times. We've got Jason in the house, and we've got Dan Hererra in the house. And Dan, by the way, it was great to see you in person for the first time at the Nova Open.
Oh, I couldn't believe it. I was so glad to finally meet you guys hand to hand.
Yeah.
Shaking, having dinner, all of that stuff. It was a great time.
You know, it was one of those things where it's like we've become friends, obviously, over the internet, essentially, right?
Yeah,
and
we could have
I've
been
seen you on
catfishing
videos.
each other this whole time.
I know, right? And I've seen you on your videos. I don't know that you've seen any videos of us. I'm sure you've seen pictures and things like that, but
No, because your Facebook picture is Chuck Norris or something.
oh, that's right. Yeah, it's John Kreese from the Karate Kid.
Okay.
Sweep the leg.
Like, what are you talking about? That's a picture of me.
No, that's right. So yeah, I mean, it was awesome to see you. Like, we were hanging out with Justin Orton and some of the other guys, and it was so cool to see the community come together for the Nova Open.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was just amazing how easy so many of the people I met there were to vibe with.
Yeah.
Just to hang out with and have a good time. We've got the in-person community for Warcry. It's a great group. I'm really happy.
Yeah, it was very friendly. A lot of fun.
Yeah. We'll talk more kind of about how the event was and sort of like, I think there's a lot of things working for us at the event, and I want to kind of talk about that as the organizer and how that worked out. But before we do that, Jason, what's on your hobby table right now?
Well, I have some Games Workshop stuff on my hobby table. It's not Warcry. I'm working on my kill team. That was one of my benchmarks, was to do Nova Open, and then once I got through my Nova Open, I was going to start banging out my kill team boxes that have been sitting on my shelf for a long time. So I did start doing that. I've got my kill team Sylvaneth, talked about the last episode. Got the terrain built, trains painted, trains ready to go. Now I'm building up the Pathfinder side of that box. I've got them all built. I'm just ready to start painting them.
Nice.
So I'm excited to get those guys on the table. I've already got a Sisters army that from when I was pursuing that path in 40K. I recognize I actually have all of the models already built and like probably 75% painted to make a Sisters novitiate kill team. So that's
rad.
Yeah. So once I get this Pathfinder one built up, even if you don't have yours painted and ready to go, we could get together and play some kill team. Be some good times.
Yeah, for sure. That would be a lot of fun.
Yep. So that's what's on my table right now. Just trying to get those greater goods painted.
Very good. Dan, how about you?
So I just painted my first Mortex Stalker, and I'm taking a little while to kind of look at it as because it's my test model for a color scheme I'm thinking about for them. So I'm just kind of letting it ruminate on my painting desk. It's been a couple days since I've painted, and just trying to decide if I like this color scheme, if I want to try something else. Something I realized I mostly like it, but something I realized immediately when I was done was, why did I do my test paint job on a stalker, which is like one of the biggest models, one of the ones I'd least want to have to respray and paint again, just as far as like losing detail. I should be doing these test paint jobs on the Mortec Guard, so I'm gonna I'm gonna need to build some of them, and if I don't love the current paint scheme, I'm gonna do future tests on the little guys.
Yeah, that's cool. So is this Mortec Guard and all the OC Bone Reapers? Is this for Warcry or is it for like Age of Sigmar? What's it
It's
for?
gonna be for Warcry. One of the first things I wanted to try that I still haven't really gotten to is like, what would it be like to make a warband that's entirely trying to use counter, right? So I
Oh,
was looking at sort of what's the cheapest way to put a lot of toughness 5 bodies out there in the game,
yeah.
just to see, because if anybody can counter a lot, it would be the toughness 5 folks, right?
Right, right.
So I was looking at Mortec Guard, and they were the cheapest toughness 5 I could find.
What are they? 80
So
points?
they're 55.
What?
Uh,
And their
they
toughness 5?
Yeah, now they're move 3. They don't really do anything for damage, right? Like, they really just exist to be toughness 5, and that's
What's their
kind of
wound?
10. Um,
That's still really
It's
good.
really
yeah,
good if you can
it's
get them
a
where
kind
they're
of a,
supposed to be.
if you can get them there, yeah. So
Yeah.
I don't know if I'll need to do like Flesh Eater Court's allies. OCR has their own movement ability that's not quite as good as the Flesh Eater Court's one, so maybe you
Hmm.
don't need the allies. I don't know. I don't think their leaders are very good, just kind of categorically as a whole. I don't think there's a single good leader in that warband.
Ugh.
Um, but
Ouch.
if you just get the cheapest leader, I do think a lot of the heavy units that aren't leaders are really good. Like, I think the Morghast are good. I think the
Uh-huh.
Stalkers are good. So no matter what, you're going to have a pretty big kind of ball and chain dragging you around in your leader. But otherwise, I think there's a lot of interesting options that I kind of want to try. And I just don't know if a warband that's dedicated to countering, if that's even viable. Like, I've never even tried anything like that. No one was at Nova with anything like that. So I just
Right.
figure, yeah, why not give it a try?
So,
Hmm.
so hear me out on this, right? Toughness 5, let's say the average attack is like 3, right? Out there. Rolling 3 dice to attack. You're hitting on 5s and 6s if you've got strength 4. So, 1 goes through, 2 don't, right?
Yep.
You're probably not going to kill that Mortec guard with that one that goes through. And you're going to end up doing what? Average of 3 damage on those other 2?
Yeah, you're gonna get hit by 2 more often than you get hit by 3, but sometimes it'll be 3. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and the hope is, even if you're doing more damage to the Mortec Guard than they are to you, the fact that it's even a question hopefully kind of turns it into a quagmire. You
Yeah.
know, the question is like, what do I do in order to win, like a treasure mission or something like that, right? There's some loopholes I gotta figure out with how I'd run it.
Yeah.
I'm not
It's
sure if,
interesting.
yeah, I'm
It's an
not sure
interesting concept.
what the right balance is.
Yeah, that'll be you've intrigued me. I'm thinking about like how that would
You've
work now.
intrigued me.
Yeah, exactly.
It's one of 3 like long-term war bands. I want to have them tested, by ages from now, really, because it takes me a long time to build and paint. But
Hmm.
that, and I want to do like maybe an Annihilator heavy Stormcast list, and then um, I'm interested in I'm interested in like monsters with Nurgle. There's just something about the Nurgle force. Spire Tyrants too, I think, are really interesting with monsters
Yeah.
as far as
Yeah.
chaos goes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anything with a chimera all of a sudden becomes very interesting.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I'm interested in Gorgons too, but this is for another day. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Let's see. My hobby table. I actually, other than pulling out the core rule book for our tournament, I haven't really cracked open the Heart of Gerbach, so I popped that open the other day and I built the Rotmire Creed. I got the Centurion Marshal the other day, so I built
Oh,
him.
nice.
Yep, he's amazing model. Amazing.
Is that the
model.
Warhammer Plus model?
No, that's the Centaur guy that's got the net and like the 4 arms.
Gotcha,
Yeah.
gotcha. Yep.
Yeah.
Think like a Chaos Kragnos.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep, there you go.
So he looks he is really like, and by the way, that model in terms of like how they designed him and like where he fit together and the like, he has no seam lines anywhere. Like the plates cover over where like the joints are of the
Sold.
plastic, you know. Yeah.
I don't need to hear anything else. I'm sold. Getting
Yeah,
one.
it's great. And I think you had a comment because I also got a box of Chaos Legionnaires the other day. And I think you had a comment on one of your videos that like these look like they're one of the craziest ones to paint. You know, there's just
I made
so
an
much
entire
going
video.
on with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I haven't put them together yet, so I can't really tell you. But I can. What I was going to say is that the Centurion Marshal, I don't think is that because he's bigger, and so even with all the brocade of the chaos like banded metal stuff that all chaos seems to have, even with that, like it doesn't seem like it's too much at all. So, but there's a lot of visual interesting things going on. So that's one that I'm going to definitely take my time in painting well. Because I think that that'll stand out as like a centerpiece for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially on a Warcry board.
Oh yeah, definitely. So I'm excited about that. But yeah, I've been kind of putting it together. My goal is to try to get these warbands painted up pretty quickly. Jason and I have been talking about doing some Warcry videos in terms of like battle reports. And one of the things that I would love to do is run the kind of branched campaign in Rotten Ruin in the book that came with the core box, and just kind of play
Cool.
that out from start to finish, into some different battle reps. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a fun take on what we were doing with first edition with the campaigns.
Yep.
A flavor of something like that. Which
Yeah.
which was always fun. Yeah, but it was fun for the person who was playing out their campaign. The other person was just playing a game.
Yeah. So I think it'll be good because, like, I was looking at it the other day, and it's like if this wins, then you move to this mission. If you win that way, you go to that mission, and it looks really cool. So
Nice.
I can't wait to try it out. But I got to get these things painted up first, so. And we got to figure out
Jason,
cameras
to
and
your
microphones
point-
and all that stuff.
Oh, yeah. To your point with that, Jason, I wonder almost you could almost do campaigns like multiplayer style, and then you'd only have to have one person who's kind of the DM. Like you could have almost 2v2, except one person is controlling 2 NPC warbands, something like that. I just wonder about how to make campaigns a little bit more of an engaging experience outside of narrative events, like narrative tournaments, which those are great. I had a ton of fun at both of the ones I've been to for that. But just like a campaign with buddies, I think there's a lot still unexplored there.
Yeah, we should think about that a little bit more. How we could engage with that. We've got several new friends that we popped out of Nova Open with that are at least local to the Northern Virginia area that said they'd be excited to kind of get together and have some more gameplay at some of our local game stores. So we'll hopefully have some opportunities to kind of explore some of those things.
In fact, I'm meeting Andy at Huzzah tomorrow night to give him his army. He had submitted it for a painting competition at Nova. I'm going to give him his army, and he's like, you want to get a game in? And I'm like, I would so love to, but I have a meeting that night.
Are you giving him his medal?
I am, or his plaque, yep.
Yeah, his plaque.
Yep.
Nice.
So
Yeah, for those who
Nice.
don't know, Andy won Best Painted in the Warcry GT. Awesome guy, and um, yeah, just really incredible paint jobs. I was watching him and the famous professional painter Martin Orlando. I was watching the narrative event on Saturday, the one that I wasn't playing in, and those two were just talking shop about painting, and it was so far over my head. It was really cool to see.
nice.
Yeah, at one point I asked him how he got his skin tone so well, and he started going through all this technical details, and I was like, okay, cool, dude. Yep, it looks beautiful.
That's awesome.
But yeah, no, that was one comment he made to me was that he actually loves painting, and the reason he loves Warcry is because he can finally put a full warband on the table that he painted. This is the problem with the big 2,000 point games is he takes so much and he puts so much investment into painting. He can never get a full army painted to get on the table. But with Warcry, he can manage 6 or 7 models.
Darcy Bono was saying she won Best Painted at Adepticon and is now a professional painter. She was saying a very similar thing, that Warcry is just a lot better for, and especially, because she gets engagement through her paint Instagram. And so it's like there's only so many things you can post of the same color scheme kind of in a row. But so Warcry kind of lets her kind of go from one striking theme to another striking theme kind of pretty quickly.
Yep.
We had her on the show at one point.
Yep.
That was a really good episode. That was way back though. She was
That
one
was
of our
that was
first few guests.
over a year ago. Yeah, but
might
still
have
follow
been
her and watch
almost
her
2
stuff.
years.
She has
Yeah.
beautiful Tau. She paints Tau very well.
She calls those the Tron Tau.
The Tron.
You
Those
know,
are the
'cause, like,
black
they
and
got-
orange ones.
Yeah, exactly. And then she also did the ones where like they're coming out of like their like cloaking thing.
Yeah, it's really
Ooh, cool.
Yeah, I initially found her because she was doing a Terminator version of the Necrons. So they had like red eyes and like red glowing, you know what I mean? And it just
yeah.
looked so cool. I was like, in my head it was like dun 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 dun, So it was so good. So yeah, everybody should check her out on Instagram, Darcy Bono. She's amazing, absolutely amazing. Yeah, cool. So yeah, that wraps up our hobby stuff. Let's get into what we all really want to talk about, which is the Nova Open. I want to start out by talking about the event a little bit. So, contrary to previous years, we were in the Renaissance Hotel, not the Hyatt Hotel. And I don't know what you guys thought about it, but I thought that the Renaissance Hotel was actually a really great place to play.
I think that it was really nice that we had kind of our own dedicated room for Warcry.
Yeah.
That was, and it was a nice room. There was good lighting. It was, we could close the doors, and it was just us in there having a Warcry event. That was really neat.
And it also felt cozier, not just because we were all together with Warcry, but then even in the larger spaces that were more dedicated to the whole event, it just being, Warcry, Kill Team, and Age of Sigmar in one hotel, and then like 40K and Lord of the Rings banned to the other hotel. It just made a much cozier environment that I really liked.
Yeah, and it was great when, I first showed up and they said, oh, this is your room. And I was a little worried because, it seems like Warcry is sort of the redheaded stepchild of GW Games right now. Even though they just released like a new box and like they're going through a transformation, like it still seems like when it comes to events that Warcry is kind of like, oh yeah, that game. We forgot about that game. So... I was a little concerned when I showed up, but then when they showed the rooms, I was like, oh, this is going to be perfect. And what I loved about it is it was just big enough that we were able to spread out quite a bit and have enough space to have, our books and our counters and our dice without like having to worry about being on top of everybody else. You could put your models where they needed to be. And we ended up putting out 9 tables, I think. Just Dan, is that right? 9 tables that we actually put terrain out at 4?
I think so. And then we got to kind of mix and match or jump between the tables with random table seating. I thought that was really good.
Yeah, and that was kind of the goal. I was worried that we're gonna have a whole bunch of like late person signups. We had 15, and then 16, and then like 2 people ended up dropping, and then so we ended up with 14 actual participants the day of, which I think worked out fine. I think that was it was a good number. I would have loved to have more. But 14 participants of people who were like totally dedicated to Warcry, really made a good tournament, like a really good tournament. I thought that the competition wise was good across the board.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep,
I
it
think
went
people
really
were
well,
just
and we had plenty of terrain, such that the boards didn't feel terrain lacking. Like I think the Gen Cons
Yeah.
tournament, the terrain was a little sparse on that one. But I think you did a really good job, and kudos to you. You assembled and painted all of the strains such that we had nine play areas with significant amount of terrain to feel like you were in a very densely populated Warcry environment. So well done.
Yeah, thank you. It was really fun. Dan came down, after I got to the hotel there, he checked in and came down and kind of helped me finalize. And we had a really good time, Dan, like just being like, okay, let's put a tree here, and let's put this building here, but let's mix that with that, fence. And like we were just kind of all over, like, making sure that things felt right, that they were balanced in each quadrant, of the board.
And it becomes a little sandbox, right? Like I never
Yeah.
have that many toys to put on my board, so it's fun to play with.
Yeah, I'll tell you what though, I think in my opinion the Red Harvest terrain stole the show in terms of like what looked really great on the board. Those big
Well, you put
platforms are
so
amazing.
much effort into it. I mean, the way you painted it is just mind-boggling. You did such a good job on the Red Harvest stuff.
Oh, thank you. What I loved were actually the little shoots that I kind of made like lines across the boards.
Yep.
And those made a difference in some of the games. Like, because those were terrain, and like some people had some mounted guys, and they could not get over them, so they had to go around them, and it definitely split up the boards in interesting ways, I thought. So it was really cool to see the terrain kind of being an active participant in some of these games.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the finals, every fight was on the edge of the big bobsled track because,
that's right.
2 move 3 warbands, we were basically taking turns positioning the other person to be on the wrong side of the track. Basically, with every activation, it was the number one priority was control over the track, or like control over who's on which side of the track, which I thought was made for a really compelling game.
Yeah, it's a lot different than when like you just all mash your armies together in the middle and see who wins, right? Like and I know that certain missions kind of push you to do that, and certain missions kind of push you to the edges. We had, and speaking of missions, we had some good ones that we used. Most of them came from the Warcry 2.0 book, and I was gonna pull some of them up. What was your guys' favorite mission that you played? Do you remember?
Ooh, I gotta think about that now.
So I have completely fallen in love with ley lines as a mission.
Okay.
That's the first one. It's sort of an objective mission, but in the first round, there's only 2 points up for grabs. In the second round, there's 3. Third round, there's 4 points. And then in the 5th round, there's 5 points up for grabs because all 5 objectives are awake. But the funny thing is, I mean, high model count warbands do have a slight advantage there, but because most of the points happen later on, if you're a low model count warband, you can still try to just like cut their numbers down so that they can't just outscore you by a ton when the later objectives come on, and then at the beginning there's only two objectives to fight over, so they're gonna be somewhere where you can get at them. So there's a real give and take that I find really compelling with that objective or with that mission.
Yeah, I like the Hidden Vault. I've played this one or a variant of it several times where it starts with 3 objectives that are on the diagonal, kind of the long diagonal of the board, and after
Yep.
the first battle round, the players roll off. The winner picks one and burns an objective, right? And then at the end of the next battle round, the other player chooses which one to burn. So at the end, there's just one kind of left on the board. I like this one because I feel like it becomes a very tactical game versus Bloodbath. It forces the two teams to kind of not hunker down, but to position themselves in a way to try to capture objectives, but also be at a place where they can very quickly move off of that objective to go towards another one. So I feel like whenever I played this one, it becomes very much a tactical movement based game that has some fighting in it. So I really enjoyed that mission.
Yeah, I really loved the Tome of Champions 21 version of that mission.
Mm-hmm.
The new version I think I love a little less, but I still really like it. I miss that you could score points. Basically, I prefer the old scoring system, but the dynamic of moving the objectives is the same as before, and it's excellent then and it's excellent now.
Yep. Yeah, and this one it's not points, it's just at the end whoever controls the last one.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that points was that made me sweat during the Gen Con one, right? Because I did talked about how like I went down 7 points like in 2 rounds, and I needed 5 rounds to win it, in overtime. So, I think Ley Lines was really interesting to watch people play because of that awakened treasure that happened, right? Because it was kind of added that little bit of not awakened treasure, awakened objective, because it added that bit of randomness in it that like you couldn't just plan for it to happen. I think with the Hidden Vault, like knowing what the first choice is going to be really tells you what the second one's probably going to be, so there's a little bit less randomness in there. What did you guys think of the Cursed Relic, which was the treasure mission? I'm curious to hear what you guys thought about in terms of like the new treasure carrier rules.
Yeah, so this is the one that Dan and I played each other on.
Oh, that's funny. Okay.
Unfortunately, both of us forgot about the movement rule.
Nice.
Just totally forgot about it. Like I picked it up and I moved my full movement, and then he picked his up and he moved his full movement. I think we both talked through it that it wouldn't really mattered in the game that we played.
Yeah.
It wouldn't really mattered, but it's the D6 damage. I like it. I like the concept of a cursed treasure. I think if we had employed the movement, like I said, I don't know if it would have mattered in our game, but I do like it as well. I have one other feeling. I feel like they should also eliminate the ability to fly when you're carrying it.
I think they do.
They do.
Do they? Okay, it doesn't say that in our battle pack, so I was missing that, but
Okay.
I think you're right.
Yeah, so that was kind of our battle pack was taken without me actually seeing the 2.0 book because I didn't have it at the time.
Yep.
But it does eliminate the fly.
Gotcha.
I believe.
Yeah. Like I said, I don't think it mattered in our game, but I think it's a really fun aspect because it slows it slows down people who would necessarily run across the board. I think that Dan, you had a really good player that got or model or unit that got it that still had a really good movement that would have helped you kind of get away anyways. But
yeah,
I
do think. I mean, warbands with a few pretty fast people are definitely still set up really well in this treasure mission.
Totally.
But it's not just auto win if they go first the way it used to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think you ended up going first in our game, but if I had gone first, I would not have just automatically won by taking it with my balloon guy and then, flying away to the corner of the board.
Yeah, I think you
Because I
would have
would have
taken it
taken
with your
damage.
Thundercat though, and that would have been a really hard kill to get down.
That's true. If I'd been able to kind of get into some terrain where, you couldn't get your monster near me, then maybe
Yeah,
it would have been pretty difficult. But yeah,
it's a
tough
good
to
game.
say. Yeah.
So we talked about ley lines. We talked about the hidden vault and the cursed relic. How did you guys like Reaper as the third mission?
Reaper's
Go
another
ahead.
classic. They've done a bunch of
Yeah,
versions of it at this
yeah.
point or maybe not a bunch of versions, but they've alternated this and trophy kills, which is basically the exact same thing. They've alternated the two in like every release, and I think for good reason. It's really simple. It is pretty tactical. Um, I don't love it because it involves a ton of running away.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels counter to the whole exercise for me. Um, but that doesn't mean it's any less sort of compelling to your brain. It
Yeah.
just like there's a ton of strategy to it. Um, like my uh, my little old guard with Swift as the Wind was absolutely my MVP. But he was the MVP because he would just cast Swift as the Wind and then all my dwarves would run away, right? And
Right.
so, it depends on what kind of game you're looking for because it's all about like your big stompy pieces hunt their cheap objective grabbers while your chief objective grabbers run away from their big stompy pieces.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a funny dynamic, but um, yeah, I mean, it's good. I think it's definitely compelling to any tournament organizer who's looking for a mission to put in. I definitely think you should
Yeah.
take a look at Reaper, even if you decide against it. Yeah.
Yep. One of my favorite parts about Reaper is there is a there's a tactical pool of points that your opponent has that you have to try to balance. What I mean by that is you can't just go have one round where you just demolish and crush a bunch of his points because that's no matter how many models you kill, the only thing that's worth a victory point to you is that you got more points than your opponent
Mm-hmm.
did. So
Yeah.
if you have I like it because then you have to have this strategy of you have to knock things down to get them weak, but not necessarily kill them because you want to kind of save them for easy meat in the next round to try to help you get points. And so
And and
I
there's a fun push and pull there because if you
yeah,
if you get them really weak, but then you don't kill them, and then your opponent wins initiative next round, sometimes they just turn around and be like, "You
they
should have
just
killed me
call.
when you had the chance."
Yeah, they
Yeah.
haul away. So you gotta
Yep.
you don't want to do that with a model that's only got a 3 movement, right? But I try to play this game in a way I've played this a few times, and I played it in a way where I balance my big guys versus little guys, and when am I willing to sacrifice something to consume hits from him or her to be able to give him a point this round, but set myself up to take the next 2 rounds
Mm-hmm.
because I've weakened a lot of his army. So I really like it. I think it does tend towards what Dan said. There's a lot of kind of tug of war. There's running away, coming back, running away, but it makes for a tactically relevant game.
Yeah, I think there's a key here, right? Which is that in each round you add up the points of the points values of the enemy fighters taken down, and then you compare. What that does is it balances the horde armies with the elite armies because if it were just models taken down, the horde ones would be at a severe disadvantage of that.
Oh, sure. Yep.
And
Mhm.
so because it's the point values, that definitely helps a lot. And you could swarm a big guy and take him down, and all of a sudden, like you're leading. What I liked about this game that I saw as I was just kind of going around, guys thought that they were out of this game early on because they may have lost like 3 or 4 models in the first round, but they found themselves back in it in round 3 because of that kind of tug of war that was happening, you know. So this is one of those that you're like, oh, this is going to be totally unbalanced, you know, looking at the two armies, and then when you play it, you're like, that was way more balanced than I thought it was, you know. So I liked it. I thought it was a good mission. So
I liked it as mission 3 too, because it was a different feel than the other mission 1 and mission 2. Mission 1 was objective, mission 2 was objective, and then we had a breather where we were just focusing on the war on the table. So I thought that was a good placement.
Yeah, that was one of the goals, right? So mission 1 was ley lines that we talked about. So you had your awakened objectives like that were kind of waking up across the board. And then mission 2 was a treasure one, so that objective was in theory moving, you know, depending on like who grabbed it and decided to try to run. And then number 3 was just straight up kill points, basically. And then the 4th one, we got back to the objectives with Hidden Vault, which I think was a great one to end the day on. So, because it's a very tactical mission there. So, yeah, awesome. Well, like we said before, we had 14 participants in the tournament that day. So we wanted to go through the lists of all of them and just kind of see who was there, what they were playing, and what we thought about what they were doing. So I sent the copies of the list to the guys, and we decided to put them in sort of reverse order, starting with the bottom player and moving all the way up to the top. So if you're listening and you want to get to the top, you can fast forward, but we think you should stick around and listen to each of the lists, because I think that there's some merit in all of these, right? So some interesting things. So let's kick it off with our first list. This was courtesy of, and I'm pulling up the name real quick. This was courtesy of Matthew Kelly. He was running an Untamed Beasts list. Now, I need to preface this a little bit. He brought an he was supposed to bring an unmade list, and apparently his dog got really excited and just shredded the package that had the models and like smashed the models too.
And it had his Blood Bowl army in it that he was going to be playing the next couple days.
Yeah.
Oh, so that's terrible.
Yeah, poor guy, but, you know, he still rallied and he pulled something together to come still be part of the tournament. So, you know, kudos to him for that.
Yeah, it was awesome that he brought it. He went, he had 3 losses and a draw on the day. And I will say this, that he struggled because he was using 1.0 points and rules. Like, he came with the fighter cards of 1.0.
So they were underpowered.
Yeah, they were severely underpowered. And someone's like, dude, are those the 1.0 cards, or did you make 2.0 ones? He's like, what are you talking about? And they're like, dude, here's the thing. And he looked at it and he's like, these guys are way better now. So
that's
I think it was game 3
because
that he
looking at his list. Yeah, the Heart Eater, because he's doing it pretty similar to Out of the Box. He had a Heart Eater, a Beast Speaker, a First Fang, 2 Plains Runners, 3 Prey Takers actually, so not exactly out of the box. I guess it looks like he dropped 2 Plains Runners for a Prey. Either way, 3 Prey Takers and a Rock Tusk. And man, the Prey Takers and the Heart Eater are so much better now than they were then. The Rock Tusk has taken a hit. That part's certainly true, but the First Fang, the Prey Takers, and the Heart Eater are just a lot better now than they were then in 1.0. That's pretty funny.
Yep.
Yeah, and so I think like the third game when he was drawing, he was playing from the downloadable list. Someone at lunch basically told him like, dude, you need to download this list and play with these rules. So he ended up pretty well. I did feel bad for him in his third game though, which was it was the second game. It was a Cursed Treasure game. He went up against the Sylvaneth list from Eric Octor, and the Sylvaneth guy had a Spite Revenant that can teleport. Or no, is it the Tree Revenants? The Tree Revenants can teleport. The Tree
Revenants, and he had 2 of them that could teleport all around. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can't wait to talk about that list, but I
Yeah.
Man, those two lists are not playing the same game. Let's just say that.
No, especially on the treasure mission, right? And so like
Yep.
his only chance was to try to like harpoon the tree revenant that was like far away and like bring him back and then like try to get him again, but it was tough. And he's like, "Oh, I feel like he auto won," and I'm like, "Well, like you don't have a very good matchup here. Like that's not a, you're going to be struggling. I feel bad for you." So
Yeah.
I think he had a better list. I think he had a better plan. Unfortunately, like that kind of went out the door when his dog decided to eat his army. And you said that he was bringing pretty much a list right out of the box. I think that's literally kind of what happened. Is he's like, "This is the list. This is the box that I have and I made, and I'm bringing it just to play with it, so I can get some games in."
Yeah.
So. Yeah, okay, all right. So the second list that we have, who got in 13th place with Torrey Smith, and he had Skaven. And it is the like total horde Skaven list here.
Yep.
I think this would actually
pretty-
be a fun list to play.
Yeah,
I think-
it's actually got a pretty cool narrative element to it, and then it's a claw
Exactly.
leader with all
Yep.
their clan rats, and then it's a
Yep.
bringer of the word with all their plague monks. So it's just like two clans coming together, and it's split right down the middle of which one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I think it'd be really fun to play this, like, on Warcry nights. And I don't know if I'd bring it to a tournament, but really fun in terms of thematic. And, I like thematic lists. My Ogre list was very thematic. Even my Flesh Eater Courts list, which we'll get later, had some theme to it. I really love it when people do themes with their lists. It
Yeah.
makes it fun.
So
Absolutely.
he had, as we said, he had one bringer of the word, 4 plague monks with the woe stave and fetid blade, and then he had 6 clan rats with rusty blades and a claw leader. So I mean, he's maxing out the top amount of models he can bring. I think he was clearly trying to use that as board control, and just make sure that he overwhelmed. But unfortunately, those clan rats aren't like the heftiest.
They're squishy.
They're very squishy.
Yeah.
And I remember him. Oh, go ahead, Dan.
I was just gonna say I've played my share of Skaven, and man, the cheap Skaven have taken such a huge nerf bat to the face in 2.0 that you're really running up that hill trying to get this into a tournament, which is too bad. Just that I think this player was in such an uphill climb, but there is still a lot of cool stuff you can do with Skaven. I think the way they're set up now with their reaction, where the cheap Skaven can give free movement shenanigans to the big Skaven. I think that's kind of what you want to have at all times. You want to have one cheap guy babysitting a big guy kind of in every deployment group, and then you see how many points you've got left. But it's pretty cool, and Skaven Swarm used to be a thing back when Plague Monks were 70 points instead of 80 for the same profile, and you could get Giant Rats for 35 points. I definitely played some All Pestilence Skaven and would tear some people apart, but now it's taken several nerfs in a row actually since those good old days.
Yeah, I mean those plague monks can do some damage, right? Like they've got a pretty good profile, but you're right, like even just jumping up 10 points, like when you add it up with how many you have to bring to make them effective, like that is a pretty significant tax there. I do like them with the claw leader. There was one game that I was watching that he ended up having like the plague monks with 7 attacks going out, because like he had done like lead from
the back. Yeah.
Lead from the back, and then there was he did lead from the back again with the bringer of the word, and so it was like a double lead from the back, and he had and they already had like 4 attacks or something like that, So they were like up to 7 attacks, and they were just taking down some big guys. But that if they didn't quite kill some of those bigger guys, I think they're playing against Stormcast. Like if they didn't quite kill the Stormcast, like the Stormcast would just come back and annihilate them. So they were so squishy. Like he needed a Rat Ogre or Stormfiend or something hefty in there that he could put up to the toughies that are out there.
Yeah, and even the missions, they've changed the missions to be harder on Swarm Warbands as well. So, I think one of the missions from the pack that we didn't play is actually really good for Swarm Warbands, but of the 4 missions we played, the only one where having a Swarm Warband is a good idea, even a little bit, is Ley Lines.
Yeah.
The other 3, it's mostly, it's not necessarily always a liability, but it's usually a liability. Like in Reaper, certainly it's a liability. So
and he won major victory on Ley Lines.
Really? So he went 1 and 3, and Ley Lines was the one win.
Yep, exactly.
Okay,
exactly.
That makes sense.
So So I mean, he dominated that one, right? And so. The other ones were, especially it was like kill. The Reaper was not a good match for him.
Right. I don't know how a list like this ever wins Reaper, but that's okay. I mean, you can just say, hey, I'm out here to go 3-1 and maybe win some prizes if tiebreakers work out, and I'll just drop Reaper, and that's fine.
Yeah, definitely. All right, cool. So the next one that we had was an interesting one. It was the Cities of Sigmar. Do I have that up there, guys?
I don't think we have that one posted.
All right, I think I missed it.
Is this the one with the gyrocopters?
No, you do. It's 2 down. Skip to the next one. Yeah.
Okay. So this is the Tempest Eye Cities of Sigmar. You've got a Rune Lord and Warden King as your heroes and leader. And you have a Gyro Bomber, a Gyrocopter, a Hammerer, an Ironbreaker, an Iron Drake, and a Longbeard. There. So this is like all dwarves, and that are just out there. I think thematically, like this was a fun army to watch on the battlefield, right? Like. You had like
this one was really well painted too. This is one of
exactly.
I ended up voting for 5 of them for best painted, which I know was not the rules, but this is one of the 5 that I voted for. I thought they did a really good job. Yeah.
Yeah, it was good. In terms of how it played though, I actually felt like and you can I don't know if you guys watched this, but when I would catch a little bit, I felt like the Gyro Bomber and the Gyrocopter were kind of liabilities at points. They were, there were 220 and 195 points, but they could move on the board, sure, but like they just didn't project much power. Like once they got there wasn't a lot of oomph.
Agreed.
I agree.
I was really excited to play this one. I had never
played
a cities list in Warcry. Now it was kind of a tweaked one, but the Gyro Bomber and the Gyrocopter is really excited to see what happened there. Unfortunately, we played Reaper, and his Gyrocopter and Bomber were both in the Hammer, which comes out in round 2. So I knew exactly where they were coming, so I went ahead in round 1 and moved folks right in so that when they came in, they would immediately be engaged and not be able to fly around and use their flying stuff. And that really made it hard for him to come back from that, because now they're just doing their melee, which, is not nothing, but they can't, he didn't have the freedom of movement to kind of make choices with them when they first came on the table.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
But they were painted so well, and it's just always fun to see a bunch of little dudes in these gyrocopters, flying around the table.
I think at one point, Jason, like it was kind of cinematic. You had your Terror Guys monster there, and we'll talk about your list in a little bit. But you had all these little dwarves just like running towards him, like
it was pretty funny. Yeah, these little Iron Breakers and Iron Drakes were just running towards him with their hammers up.
It was like the Hobbit, with Smog and the dwarves,
awesome.
So like it was great. It was great. So he ended up going 1-3 as well. He lost his first one. This is Tori. Or no, sorry. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Oops, I skipped Beast of Chaos. My bad. That's why it was 2 down. He lost his first one, won the second one, so he won the Hidden Vault, which probably meant that or not the Hidden Vault, the Cursed Treasure, which
Cursed
means
Treasure,
that he
yeah.
probably grabbed it with the gyrocopter and just said, "See ya," you know. And then he lost the last 2. So he got some minor losses on some of the other ones. So like he had some pretty close games, it looks like, but not enough to get enough points. So
Yep.
yeah. So he was number 11. That was Matt Tillman. Sorry, I skipped over Andy, who we talked about earlier, had best painted. So he had an amazing looking Beasts of Chaos list.
With a really cool display board, and I have not seen there were 3. There were 3 display boards that came to the tournament. Really well painted. The Sylvaneth one was on one. Peter's was on one, right? He had like a moon kind of palette thing, and then this one was on like kind of a landscape.
Yeah, I actually think that his display board. Don't get me wrong. His models were painted really well, but it's the display board that drew people into his army, and then they looked at the models and were like, "Oh wow," you know what I mean? These are painted really well. So, there's some people who are like, "Oh, I don't know about display boards." I think for Warcry, being able to do like a cool little display board actually really enhances your warband. Dan,
and it's more approachable than it is for AOS.
Yeah, totally.
Because
totally.
One of my takes on display boards is I was actually really encouraged walking around the AOS event that almost half of the nominees for Best Painted actually didn't have a display board, which as someone who is completely daunted by the idea of making one, just like gave me a huge sigh of relief that, there were plenty of people who had just put a ton of work into their army but not done a display board and still caught a nomination. But I do think for Warcry, it's a lot less frightening to make one. So I don't know. I think I'll probably try to make one for Adepticon. I'm not sure. Really depends on what I'm bringing, right? If I bring a monster, I'm not going to make a display board to go with it because that's just too big, too much work. But
I mean,
yeah,
Darcy
otherwise
Bono's
I'm
display
interested.
board. Do you
Was
remember
incredible.
that from Adepticon?
That's the best Warcry display board I've seen. Yeah.
She literally went out and sawed a log, Jason, because she had like a Sylvaneth, right? And it was like her autumn.
She had Beasts of
Sylvaneth.
Chaos, but they were themed to be hunting Sylvaneth. Yeah, she had autumnal Beasts of Chaos who were like, bringing autumn to the summer of Sylvaneth, basically, and it was it was like really well done.
But her display board was like a raw cut slab of log that she had cut, and then like kind of built it up. Like it just was like, wow, this is incredible. So, yeah, it was amazing. But yeah, so let's talk about this Beast of Chaos list. He had the Great Brace Shaman, which is his hero. He had Dragon Ogre with Draconic Warglaive, Bloodkine with Bulgar Great Axe, Bestigor, another Bloodkine with a Bulgar Axe and Shield, and another Bestigor. The Bloodkines are like the leader version of the what are they? They're the leader version of the
of the
why am I
Bulgar.
forgetting this? It's of the Bulgar, I think. Yeah, right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, yeah. So that's why you're probably like Bloodkine. What is that? It's the leader version of the the Bulgar. So, yeah.
Andy had actually one of those things where your final placing isn't very good despite a pretty successful day. So like Andy won one and tied one and then had to get paired up against me in round 3.
Right.
And so he was actually in essentially the semifinals with a chance to win the tournament, despite eventually coming in pretty close to last place, just because of the weird way that rounds can settle out in in a 4-round tournament, like I think if we'd gone 2 days and played 8 rounds, I think he would have ended with a much better record in day 2, right? Because he would
Yeah.
have been kind of in the low anyway. So his list was very cohesive, and I think it worked very well. The only thing is those Bestigors against me were just like huge liabilities. Um,
And you're playing in Reaper, right, against him.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The
And you
Bestigors
you
were
had
really easy to take down.
you
Oh,
had a
go on.
Stormcast list, right?
I was playing Kharadron Overlords, but everyone
Oh,
only
that's right.
just remembered my Stormcast ally. Yeah. But my list
That's
was
funny.
technically Kharadron Overlords.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. That's right. So, yeah, those Bestigors are very, very squishy. And he had some hard hitters. The Great Bray Shaman, he kept telling me over and over again, he was the real MVP. Like, people would look at the Dragon Ogre and
Yep.
be like, "Oh my gosh, I'm scared of that thing." But it's really the Great Bray Shaman because he had kind of the pull ability, right, to be able to like grab a unit or a model and pull it towards him, and
Yep.
usually pull it into combat with the Dragon Ogre, and that was kind of his combo that he was really hoping for the tournament. And so he told me if anybody got wise to that and took out his Great Bray Shaman, he was pretty much screwed. And I think that that's kind of what happened in some of his later games that he had.
Yeah. I actually tried to kill the Great Bray Shaman and failed, and then had to run away when one of the blood kinds caught up to me. But yeah, it mostly just went around the Bestigors. He was telling me after the game that if he were to kind of move it around or move the models around for different points, he would actually drop the blood kind with the axe and shield. He said that the blood kind with the great axe was amazing for him all day, but the one with the axe and shield, he said that the extra toughness from the shield didn't actually come into play for him. And that
Probably
he would
just
have
bumped him up from
rather
5
had.
to 6 toughness, right? Like,
Yeah, I think so. And so I don't think it was worth it for him. And he would have wanted to have a little bit more damage.
yeah, that's diminishing. Like, after 5, it starts to become diminishing returns, right? Like,
Right. And I think he was talking about how he could have dropped a Bestigor for a Gore and then turned that Bloodkind into a Cockatrice,
oh,
because he was saying that he didn't have enough movement. Because the Dragon Ogre is pretty fast, and the Bloodkinds are fast too. I mean, they move 5, but they don't have, I mean, that's just the Cockatrice is in a totally different league, right?
yeah, yeah, definitely. So, yeah, but he overall, so that took into account. I think this is a testament of his painting, right? So his placings in just the actual tournament, he placed 12th, and if you do overall, which you include the painting, he ended up getting 6th overall.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So, yeah, like he was up much higher, if you counted in the painting scores and stuff like that. So, very
I mean, he
interesting.
was definitely the best painter at the table. I'll
Yeah.
say that. That was pretty incredible. And again, I mean, I know I kind of mentioned this before, but a much better player with a much better list than his placing would indicate, just because
Mm-hmm.
his good placings came early, and then he had to play some of the top lists in the tournament, and then kind of fell down. So,
Yep.
total points is low, but I think there's a lot to like with this list, and I think he plays it pretty well.
Which I wanna just have like a quick side note right now. The way that the tournament was scored is that you would get a major victory if you won and more than half of your army was still intact. A minor victory, which was 15 points, was you won and less than half of your army was still intact. A minor loss, or a draw, was that you tied pretty much, and then a minor loss was you got 5 points if you lost, but you were able to take down half or more of your enemy's army, and then a major loss was that you lost and you didn't get to take down half or more of the army. So you can kind of deduce from some of the points that like they may have gotten like a major early on, and then they just struggled to kill, more than half even if they lost. Or we're going to talk about Peter in a little bit. He won and lost, and they were all super close. So he wasn't getting the majors or the or the minors basically. So it was kind of interesting. But before we get there, let's talk about Lawrence Cutlip Masons. He was running actually the Blood Bowl tournament and stuff, and he brought he was kind of a late addition to it, but he brought the Lumineth Realmlord list. So, which was kind of interesting to see them out there. He had an Alara Stone Mage, a High Sentinel as the leaders, and then his fighter he had 2 Sentinels, 3 Wardens, and two Blade Lords, and 1 Dawn Rider.
Yeah, I played against him, and he only had one Lumineth Realmlords model in his list. The rest was all old school high elves. It was super cool. He had them on the correct bases, right? The new base sizes for LRL. He had everything ship-shape. And the hilarious thing is they were always the high elves that mapped directly to the Lumineth, right? So it was literally high elf blade lords for his blade lords, and like high elf spearmen for his spearmen, and high elf archers for his sentinels, and high elf dawn riders for his Lumineth dawn riders, right? And just really incredible. He clearly has been hobbying for years, if not decades, despite actually being at least he seemed like a young guy. Maybe he's just well preserved, who knows? But I thought that was really cool. Just like incredible style points.
Yeah, for sure. He ended up losing his first 2 rounds, and then he got paired up in the 3rd round against his best friend, who is Matthew Kelly, with the Untamed Beasts, and they drew. And like at the end of it, they just looked at me and they're like, "Literally, this was bound to happen. Like we always tie." So I thought
Reaper's
it was pretty
an easy
funny.
one to tie on too, because it's really easy to tie 2-2 and not have enough time for another round. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was pretty funny. They're like, "Literally, this just happened. We tied." So it was pretty funny.
We should also plug that he full time is a woodworker that makes game materials. His company, I think, is called Wood Tactics.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting here staring at his card that he gave me. He had Warcry tokens that he had made, wood tokens that he had made. Him and his and Matthew were playing with.
Yeah.
Oh, he didn't even tell me that he made them himself. Okay,
He
that's
made those
cool.
himself. And Matthew was using a kind of a nice little portable wooden dice tower that he made for him as well.
That he had
really
laser
good.
cut. Yeah, it was really
Yep.
nice. Really nice.
Yeah, it was really good. Really good. All right, so Dan, you're probably best qualified to talk about this next guy, JJ Austrian.
Oh, love JJ. JJ's a buddy of mine from Minneapolis. We played together before the tournament to kind of figure out our lists. We've played a couple times this summer. We met at Adepticon, and it kind of have been friends ever since. Meet up every once in a while to play. So, yeah, we had been testing a few lists for him. He had tested one that was mostly Chaos Warhounds. To try to see if that reaction was worthwhile. And we ended up kind of going against the Warhounds because, at least in our testing game, I wonder if I steered him wrong because my list was so good at killing the Warhounds. Basically, he never got to do the reaction because I could always drop down with my Mizzen Master or my Thundercat and just kill the Warhound before it could do its little cool combo thing to keep one of his leaders alive. And so I think that led us to believe that the Warhounds weren't worth it, which made him abandon them entirely, when I'm realizing that against some of the lists we've seen today, they would not have been able to pull his combos apart as easily.
Yeah.
So maybe the Warhounds would have been more worth it. But hey, he went 2-2, so it all worked out. I mean, it worked totally fine. The Marauders with flail, so basically he had a Varangard with the spear, 6 Marauders with flails, 2 of them in each deployment group, an Exalted Champion, which is like one of the Slaves to Darkness kind of beefier foot heroes, and then a Dark Oath War Queen, which is another one of the really good Slaves to Darkness foot heroes. They have a bunch of them. The War Queen is statted to be more damage, less survivability, and the Exalted Champion is statted to be a little bit the opposite. Yeah, just like a nice little all-around list. I think. I mean, I think he was happy with it. I mean, he's not out here to win the tournament, but if he can go 500, I think he's really happy with the performance. And yeah, he knows his list a lot better than he lets on. He knows how to play a lot better than he lets on. Because he pretends like he doesn't know what he's doing, but he knows what's up. And the Varangard is solid. I think personally that Varangard should cost 40 more points and do 40 more points worth of stuff. They don't feel quite as epic as they should. But as like a game piece, agnostic of the lore, I think it's pretty solid. I think if you're going to play against JJ, you need to be using terrain to your advantage to stop him from bullying you with the Varangard. Because it can, if you can't use the terrain, if you can't exploit the mount keyword on the Varangard, it absolutely is capable of kind of bullying your important pieces off of the table.
And I remember it was round 2, the treasure mission. His Varangard was trying to chase down Justin Orton's Gorgrunta. And the terrain, they both ended up on one of the terrains that had the sluice from Red Harvest, and they couldn't climb over it with their mounts because it was just over an inch. And so they were playing keep away, almost like Duck Duck Goose, like running around this thing while one's trying to chase the other one. So it's funny that you mentioned terrain, because like Justin won that game against JJ pretty handily, and the big reason is because he was able to use the terrain to just keep that Varangard out of his face. So I thought it was very interesting. I think the Varangard's good. I think you're right. I think it needs to be. I think it actually. This is going to sound crazy. I think it needs to cost more and do more for me to like it more.
Yeah, like I was saying, it just doesn't match the lore very well. For 285 points, it doesn't feel like you're getting that much more than you get for a Doom Knight, which is the Chaos Knight leader. And you actually get less than you do for a Chaos Lord on Karkadrak, though the Karkadrak is kind of overcosted. It's not quite as exciting as it should be, but it's solid, and I think this list is pretty solid too. I think, just having 3 thick fighters and then having some chaff to surround them with, and then having your fighters be in each deployment group, it's always going to be a recipe for having a reasonable time at Warcry, right? Like, you're never going to be totally out of it in any mission if you can put a warband together like that.
Yeah. So he won his first, lost his middle 2, and then won the last, which is interesting because you could consider Hidden Vault sort of in the same category as Ley Lines. You know what I mean, in terms of like the fixed objectives and shifting objectives type of thing. So that list obviously did better with that strategic play, or maybe Justin, or maybe JJ did. Maybe he was just better with that strategic play too. So
yeah, maybe.
Interesting. All right, so number 8 was our good friend Peter, American Cabbage. Sorry, Peter. I'm really sorry. I actually apologized to him in person. I'm like, dude, I butcher your name all the time, and he told it to me, and I said it right in the moment, and no, I'm not saying it right. So, Peter was our one that won the Huzzah event. He came in second at Gen Con. He was playing the same Gitz list. This time, though, he switched it up a little bit because of the points adjustments. Obviously, was like a big factor. So he went with a Bounder boss, a Squig Hopper boss, which was the same from his other list. Then he had another Squig Hopper, a Fillwater Troggeth, Brugit, and a Stabba with a barbed net. Now, he swapped the Squig Hopper, the regular Squig Hopper, before I believe that he had more Stabbas and a couple of Shootas.
Yep.
So, and he also added in the Fellwater Troggeth. So, very interesting. Did either of you play, Peter?
Not at this tournament.
No, I didn't.
Okay. Peter had an interesting go of it. And I think he was very disappointed in how he ended up because he won his first two and then he lost his last two. But he only ended up with 35 total battle points, so if you're thinking like, okay, a major win's 20 and this, what we kept talking about was that his list, aside from the Troggeth, which he really liked the Troggeth, his list was very, very squishy. Very squishy.
Yeah, he was telling me that before the tournament. I got to talk with him, and he was telling me how it's much harder to build Gitz without any allies now because you just can't take the beating. And I was asking him, well, like the reaction lets you just teleport your guys into combat. And he goes, well, yeah, but if they come into combat with you, you teleport in, and they haven't used all of their actions yet, then they just attack your leader instead of attacking your foot guy, and then your leader gets 2 attacks into them, but then like your leader's really low all of a sudden now, and now you're in trouble. So I thought that was really interesting and kind of prophetic. Like before the tournament, he said he had clearly put a ton of work into figuring out how to solve the Gitz puzzle of, generally having their points per, their stats all went down, but their reaction is the best in the game. So it's like, how do you solve this thing with this broken reaction, but this really weak model line? Yeah. And it was basically prophetic the way he said it, of just like, man, everything's great except for your fighter pieces just don't always win the fight. And then he played against Gitz with no Gitz,
right?
and basically lost because Gitz with no Gitz got to use the Gitz reaction, but didn't have to pay for the reaction with reduced stats, basically.
Yeah, and so what happened with Peter is he explained it right, is that he would win, but it would be a minor victory every time. So
sure.
He wasn't getting the 20 points, he was getting the 15 points. And when he would lose, it was a major loss. So he wasn't getting the minor loss and he wasn't getting the major victories that would bump him up points-wise, that would have put him probably in the top 5, to be honest with you, because he's that good of a player. Yeah. But it was just the fact that he kept losing more than half of his army wouldn't get him those extra points. So he's like, I got to figure out a way to like make these guys less squishy, or maybe put more people in the army if I can, so that if I do lose some, that I'm still over 50%.
Yeah, I think when you play a tournament where you have scoring that's based off of, half or more of your army, if you're going to have few models, it seems like the elite-based lists are going to do better with that, because a small model squishy count means you're going to be struggling with that minor victory, major loss a lot, just because of the collateral damage that happens in 4 rounds on the board.
Yeah, and as long as there's no more than 16 players, it doesn't reduce your odds of winning the tournament outright. Like if you go 4-0 with 4 minor victories, you're still probably going to win the tournament. I guess in theory, someone with 3 majors and a minor loss could overcome you, but they have to they really have to come close, or it has to all work out for them perfectly. So you're still usually going to win. And it's another one, kind of like with Andy. He was 2-0 in the semifinals with a chance to win the tournament. And so a 2-2 here isn't necessarily indicative of the list not being great or him not being a great player. It's just like sometimes the closer you get to winning, the harder it is to actually sort of place well at the end. Like if there'd been more rounds, I think he would have done better. Because I think weren't his only losses to the number 1 and 2 place players?
Let's see. His first loss, hold on. His first loss was to Justin Orton, who won the whole thing, right? In round 3. And then his second loss was to Eric Octor, the Sylvaneth player.
Okay. So number 1 and number 4.
Yeah.
So, and those were his only 2 losses in the tournament. So, a pretty good opposing win percentage, I guess.
Yeah, totally. And I think, here's a little side note. When you're using Swiss pairings, right, which is, you randomize first round. In the second round, the winners will play the winners, the losers will play the losers, right? The 1-0s play 1-0s, the 0-1s play 0-1s.
Right.
And then you have your next round, and that even further splits it down, right? So your 2-0s will play each other, your 1-1s will play each other, and then your 0-2s will play each other. And then in the fourth round, that splits it down even further, right? So it's totally possible, though, if you lose your first one, to have an easier path to a 3-1 than if you were to win your first 3 and then lose your last one, because of the way that it places you into the different brackets. So I think that this is one of those that if you look at it, right, he goes 2-2, and he ends up number 8 overall with 35 battle points. But the next guy we talk about went, he lost his first 2 and then won his last 2, ended up with 5 more battle points than him. So I think he had. And this is Daniel Kelly, who came in number 7. Daniel Kelly lost his first 2 and then won his last 2. So, in theory, like that third opponent that he played was probably near the bottom of the group anyway. He's not playing some of the top table guys for that third win. Meanwhile, Peter's playing the guy who ended up eventually winning the whole thing. Right, so that's just kind of a little interesting thing about sort of the Swiss pairings, and I don't know if it's a con. I don't know if it's a feature versus a bug or whatever.
I think it's a positive the more rounds you have.
Yes.
But the problem is Swiss gives you a legit champion after the minimal amount of rounds, but really you need to get, like, a Magic tournament has like 12 rounds, right? And the last undefeated player happens around round 8, right? And so rounds 9, 10, 11, 12, all 4 of those rounds, there's no undefeated players, and everyone's just jockeying for position. And that's when Swiss is really, like, the benefits of Swiss really show up, and they actually do start to sort people into the best players, right? Because Peter would have, in theory, if your theory's right, Peter would have then played multiple rounds against all these 2-2 people, and he would have destroyed them, right? And he would have, and Magic pros will talk about falling into the X2 bracket and going like 6-0 in the X2 bracket because like it's just a certain type of list that can end up there sometimes. And so, yeah, I think Swiss is better when you have a lot of things. Though, if we are going to move on to Daniel Kelly's Iron Golems list, I think Iron Golems look a lot better this edition than they used to. I don't know if, we're still searching for what the ideal version is. Daniel ended up with 970 points, so was leaving a lot on the table. There's no triumphs in Warcry, so you actually get punished pretty heavily for being short on points. But yeah, I think it's cool.
I mean, if you look at, he had a Dominar, an Armator, a Drillmaster, 3 Iron Legionaries, and a Signifer, and that's so basically like the build out of the box. Right? And in fact, his models weren't really even painted, half of them. I think what happened is he assembled them the night before because his dad's like, dude, we're going to a tournament. Let's go. His dad is Matthew Kelly, who brought the Untamed Beasts, and so it could have been, too, that his dad was planning to bring the Unmade, Matthew was planning to bring Untamed Beasts, and because the dog got to it, he's like, oh, crap, let's play with something else, right? So, I will say this, too. Matthew really didn't kind of know the rules in the beginning. I had to help him quite a bit, in knowing just kind of, how it worked. He had clearly played before, but, didn't really have, a history of playing Warcry, right? Sure. But he's a sharp player, super smart, kind of really picked it up, and he did the same thing his dad did. After 2 games, he realized that there are new rules for the Iron Golems, and that really gave him some oomph behind his swings, because their profiles were very different.
Every single Iron Golem was buffed in the new edition. So yeah, I bet. Man, now I wonder if he were going to play the tournament again, I wonder what his record would be, because I think Iron Golems are kind of a hot pick now.
And we have 970 points. Here's what he put in the his listing. I think it's actually less than that now because the points also went down. So I think he could have fit in another ally. I think he could have fit in, if he dropped maybe one of the Iron Legionaries, he could have definitely fit in another leader somewhere.
Or maybe drop the Signifer to fit in and just switch the Signifer out for a Drill Master. That's a pretty quick switch there, and lots of interesting stuff you could have done. And the Ogre Breacher is way better now than it was at the time. Yeah.
So he had that kind of epiphany of oh crap, I'm using the wrong rules, and also he was remembering how to play the game, and so I think he did very well his last 2 games. But again, he also had a bit of an easier path because he dropped down into kind of the 0-2 bracket early on, So very interesting to see. All right, so we're going to get to Casey Van Camp. Jason, this is one of our local guys who's in our local gaming group, and he came out to the Huzzah event with a straight, out-of-the-box Corvus Cabal army, and unfortunately that that event for him didn't work out super well for him because he's going to get some more tailored warbands, right?
I think it was a good event for him to understand the game and get experience with his list and learn that he couldn't take an out-of-the-box list with him. And he looked at it and decided, hey, I need to have a little bit more. I need to have something in this list that packs a little bit harder of a punch so there's a stronger threat I can put at the table. And so he brought that Ogroid Myrmidon, which I think achieved what he wanted because I felt like he had a much better tournament this time. And felt like he had he had options on the table when he played this time.
Yeah, and he ended up bringing 2 Shrike Talons as well, which are kind of like the big baddie and in there, and so
he's got a very elite list. You're right. That's interesting. Cool.
It is, and I think it worked out for his play style too. And there's something to be said about that, right? Building a list that is one that you want to play, naturally, your natural instincts kind of play into that.
Yep.
Because those Shrike Talons gave him a lot of movement, a ton of movement, and then he could follow it up with some really punchy, killy power from that Ogroid Myrmidon. One of the games that he ended up losing, it was the third.
Against Sylvaneth?
Third game against Sylvaneth. And the only reason he lost that game is because the Sylvaneth Spite Revenant just kept chucking the net on him, on that Ogroid Myrmidon, and he couldn't get to where he needed to be. And that literally won Eric the game in case he lost it because of that. And he's like, is there anything I can do? I'm like, just hope he doesn't roll a 4. You know what I mean? Or try to get priority and activate first, you know what I mean, and kill that guy that's throwing you in there. But he just wasn't getting the priority that he needed to activate first, and of course, Eric was a smart player and kind of just kept throwing that net. So, again,
I hesitate to say stuff like the only reason it won, because obviously if a mechanic had been played differently, the whole game would have played a little bit differently. But I think that Eric knew what he was doing, and Eric was focusing on the right thing to counter Casey in that Reaper matchup.
Yeah. It's like saying the only reason you won is the entire reason you put your list together. Well, okay. I mean, yes, actually, thank you. I did put my list together to do the only reason that I won. But this Corvus list fascinates me. Just doing Smash Corvus, essentially, with the 2 Shrike Talons, the Myrmidon. Myrmidons have gotten better in the new edition, too.
Yep.
And then the Shadow Piercer, not like one of the top leaders to write home about, but no slouch either, So a lot of hitting power here, which is really interesting, and I've never seen someone run Corvus this way, and it sounds like it was very effective, so that's pretty cool.
Sometimes it's good to have a fresh take on the game. Casey is a fairly new player, so he played one tournament. He learned a lot about the weaknesses of his list, and he went and took a spin on it that maybe we haven't seen much before.
Yep.
And what I loved about it is, he ended up going 2-2. He had a loss win, right? Went 2-2, and what I loved about it though is that he was so happy with his performance comparatively, right? Because he's like, I played harder lists, but I played better, and he's like, I knew what was going wrong, like when I was losing, so it wasn't like, man, why can't my guys just be a little bit better, right? Like he's like, oh, I was outplayed tactic wise, or there's abilities that prevented things, instead of just like the wholesale army just not doing well. Right?
That's such a huge level up with any game, is when you start figuring out why you're losing, because you have to do that before you can start winning, right? It's like you have to know why you're losing, and so that's cool to hear.
Look, I think that this tournament showed that Casey has the potential to be a really good Warcry player.
Oh yeah,
that his set he got to go from, what was it, 0-4 with a bespoke out of the box Warcry list to 2-2. Playing good games, man. I think he's only got some positive experiences ahead of him if he sticks with it.
And he ended up playing in the narrative play, I think the next 2 days, maybe just the next day. But he ended up playing in the narrative play and having a total blast with it. And that was just more experience for him to keep playing, So
good stuff. Stick with it, Casey.
Things. Yeah, exactly. All right, John Brown had Stormcast Eternals. He ended up... I love the title of his list, by the way. It's Sweat for the Sweat God.
The Sweat God. Love that.
It's so great. So he's one of those Victory Gamer guys that's in our local area that's like, dude, let's play, right? Jason, I think you played this list, right?
I played it the last round of the tournament. Yep.
Yeah. So he had Vindictor Prime, a Lord Imperatant. He had 2 Praetors and 2 Vindictors in there. So it was very much the Thunderstrike Stormcast that he was playing. And it came in right at 1,000 points.
Yeah, it was. This is an extremely strong list. The fact that you have the ability to give free actions to other elite units. It was so scary when I was playing the list. It was a very back and forth tactical game that we had, where I was not focusing at all on damage, because I didn't even want to try to wet noodle slap those things. I just wanted to control the battlefield with the movement, and so I think that.
Was this your round 4?
It was my round 4. Yeah. I think what really helped me win this game was tactical movement. I would run in and engage his unit with a tiny little ghoul, sacrifice a ghoul so that he would have to sacrifice an action to keep him positioned away from objectives. Mm-hmm. And then when it was my turn, if the ghoul was still alive, I would disengage and move back to a position that would keep him from being able to move forward again. So I really played kind of like fence post ghouls to control him outside the objectives. But he had he played good too, and it was a tight game. Like I said, I think this is a very strong elite list, and the reason I say that is because, let's see, how many did he have? Let's see, 1, 2, 3,
6
4, 5, 6. Yeah, that's a lot
for Stormcast. It
for
is, yeah.
for elite Stormcasts. That's
Yep.
6 units. That's a lot, and so it was very much a very strong threat list that does not. It could be very punishing for mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of interesting that this is, of your wins, it was the one that you didn't just like smash them easily. And, if he wins that game, we're talking about him as one of the highest placing lists at the tournament. So, yeah, really interesting. I think Stormcast got so much more play in the new edition. I think before you had to really figure out interesting kind of things with them. I do think, Jason, that your Protectors list was good and has even more play in this edition. But
Yeah.
I think Thunderstrike has a lot to like too, with especially the Lord Imperatant ability that kind of supercharges everyone nearby the Lord Imperatant. And I took a Vindictor Prime and 6 Vindictors in the narrative event, and it was a blast, but also they were surprisingly effective. And this is, that's a list without as much play as this list, right? On purpose, of course, because you don't want to bring too much of a heavy hitting list to a narrative event. But even then, it just felt sometimes, anytime my opponent had to get through Vindictors to get somewhere, I just felt like I had already won, because I knew they weren't going to get through those Vindictors.
I think the
is
strength
cool.
of the Vindictors, really, my opinion, is the 2-inch. The
Oh,
2-inch
totally.
reach. Because you can move, you can attack, and then on the next round, you have the freedom to still move around without being engaged.
Oh, so that's good too. And then what I was finding, and I think would even be more true with Protectors, is I could position them so that my opponent couldn't attack one without the other one also being able to attack them.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so that put my opponent in really difficult positions, because there is no one-on-one fight that you can create against a bunch of Vindictors. And those are fighters you want to be fighting one-on-one. You don't want to be fighting them two-on-one. So yeah, interesting
Yeah,
stuff.
they'll give you death by 1,000 cuts, right?
Right.
I mean, pretty much everyone except for, I think, the Vindictor Prime. Well, the Vindictor Prime has it too. Everyone except for the Lord Imperatant has a 2-inch reach on this entire army. So goodness gracious,
cool.
That's pretty amazing. So love to see it. It's great, because I think, Dan, you and I had talked even on the show before about how Vindictors weren't that great in 1.0.
They were awful.
They were okay.
And they dropped in points and got one more attack.
Yeah.
And now they're solid. It's really
exactly.
cool. Yeah.
Definitely. All right, so Josh had taken 5th. He went, loss, win, loss. Obviously, the last loss was to you, Jason. But now we move into the top 4. So this is Eric Octor with his Sylvaneth list. We've talked about him before. He had a loss and a win. His first loss was to none other than Justin Orton, the eventual winner. So he lost the first one, and then, again, win. He... Again, I think had that ability in... He's playing Sylvaneth. Let me go over his list real quick. He had an Arch Revenant, Spite Revenant. In the Shield, a Kurnoth Hunter with Scythe, a Spite Revenant, Tree Revenant in the Hammer, Kurnoth Hunter with Scythe, Spite Revenant, Tree Revenant. So 3 Spite Revenants, 2 Tree Revenants, 2 Kurnoth Hunters, and an Arch Revenant. I thought this was a very balanced list. It did a lot of things.
The Spites are the ones that can throw the net on you, right?
Yep, and the trees can teleport.
Yeah, it's very much a list that has the potential to control, to do a lot of... This would be like the blue mana deck, right?
Yeah, despite it being all green things that are
right.
Sylvaneth. Yeah, I think... So... Eric's list is actually kind of similar to Justin's in some ways, but the thing that blows me away with this list is it makes me think differently about building lists in general because the number of abilities that Eric has at his fingertips with this list in any given round is insane. Um,
Mm,
where the Arch Revenant can give the +1 attack bubble.
yeah.
He has a net in every deployment group. And then he has the Tree Revenants that can teleport. And so for any given dice roll, he just has this array of options at his fingertips that means that, I mean, like what you were saying, it's not just a blue control deck where you're trying to, like, you say no to everything. It's like he's creating a different answer to every problem. He's like
Mm-hmm.
creating some kind of toolbox going on. Um, yeah, it's really amazing. Kind of, he can switch between this blue control style, and all of a sudden he's attacking you with the Kurnoth Hunters and teleporting
Yeah.
away with the Tree Revenants at the same
Yeah.
time. Um, Maybe it's like if you ever played against fairies when fairies were good, where they would sit back and play blue control for 4 turns, and then all of a sudden there'd be like a Bitter Blossom and 2 Scions of Una in your face, beating you down faster than you thought was possible. And you were like, how did that switch? I'm playing against an aggro deck now? I thought I was playing against a blue control deck. I feel like this is really like the fairies of Warcry, and I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Justin went after that Arch Revenant first thing, and then focused on trying to get the Kurnoth Hunters down. And that was just kind of, and then obviously they're playing Ley Lines, so, that definitely plays in favor for those Tree Revenants. So, and then of course, during the treasure mission, those Tree Revenants picked that thing up and would like bloop out into the corners and be like, come and get me, and then bloop to the exact opposite corner of the board. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, what do you
I
even
felt
do
bad for the
against
guy.
that?
It sucked, but that's just kind of how it is. So
Yeah, there's
yeah,
just so much play to this list, and I think it's really revealing that he only lost to the tournament champion.
yeah, and he got 50 battle points. So let me just look really quickly. So in round 1, he actually didn't get any battle points. So that means in round 2 he got 15. So he got a minor victory, and then he ended up with a major victory. So he did very well. Very well in the tournament with a list that when I first saw it, I wasn't thinking that was going to be as standout as it ended up being.
Same. I wasn't thinking about, man, I've put a lot more thought into it recently, but at the time, yeah, I agree. I didn't realize how important all those abilities would be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially because, I mean, the control from the spite, that's a double.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
It's like
incredible.
you've always got a double.
and then you
always
do have to
a
roll.
double.
Yeah, exactly. You do have to roll a 4 up for it to go off. So you have to spend the double and then roll a 4 up, but it's worth it. You know what I mean? Especially if you got 3 of
Yeah.
them. I mean, you could
Yeah.
you could use a couple of doubles if you needed to.
Well,
And
and
these
if you
revenants-
really
Oh.
Go ahead, Dan.
I was just gonna say they all went up 5 points, but got 2 wounds back. And
Yeah.
2 wounds doesn't really sound like it's worth 5 points, but when it's 8 wounds to 10 wounds, then you're kind of talking, because that's oftentimes the difference between the number of attacks that kills them. So I do think it gets a lot harder. Like a lot of other netters just have more fragile profiles, and so having 10, 10 wounds on your netter, and
Mm-hmm.
the Spite Revenants actually kind of do some real damage too. And so if your thing is going to be, well, I'm going to charge his netters right away and stop him from netting me later, it's like you could actually take some real damage trying to charge those
Yeah.
netters.
Yeah, compare these netters with the Gloomspite Gitz ones, right? And these are in a different category.
Yeah.
So, yeah, definitely. All right, let's move to our top 3, which I think we know who got number 3 here. Dan, why don't you go over your list with us, buddy?
Yeah. So I played a Mizzen Master, Thunder Prime with the Grand Stave. That's a Evocator on Dracoline. Evocator Prime on Dracoline with Grand Stave. Then an Old Guard, which is Tempest Eye. It's basically a Tolkien dwarf with a hammer and a shield. And then 5 Arcanaut Company with Pistol. Those are dwarves that couldn't be any further from Tolkien if you tried. And then an Arcanaut with Spear, which is maybe a little halfway in between.
Skypike.
But yeah, the Skypike. And I set it up so that the Thunder Prime was in my dagger with a couple of the Arcos. The Old Guard was in my hammer with the spear and one of the pistols, and then the Mizzen Master was in my shield. Really liked how the list turned out. So I went for this idea that I wanted my hammers to be really fast because my cheap guys were all really slow. And so I felt like that balance worked out. I felt like there were a couple missions where I was sweating because my hammers, once they were in fights with opposing hammers, point for point, they weren't as good at fighting, right? But they gave me so much utility that I was generally able to overcome that. And, basically I made one misplay with my Mizzen Master the whole tournament where I overcommitted it and realized later that I could have just actually flown it to terrain and used the shooting attack. I had basically dismissed the shooting attack out of hand because it's like the regular smacking attack is so good. But in that situation, I really didn't have to put him in danger, and I did, and then he died, and that was why I lost that game. And because I couldn't pop Fight for Profit on later rounds to burn off his goblins off the final objective. So yeah, really interesting stuff where I played a wall of dwarven meat plus a glass cannon and then one giant terrifying lion that runs around the board, and probably was one misplay with my glass cannon away from winning the tournament. So I felt really good.
Yeah, I thought it was a great list. You had a good balance of fast movement and slow movement with a good model count.
Yeah, it was. This was a solid list, man. I looked at it and I was like, okay, I see what he's going for. I'm curious to see how it will do on the table, and it did better than I thought it would have. I assumed that you were coming with a nice list that would do well, but yeah.
So I'm curious, what were
really
you skeptical about?
It was all the dwarves and the shooting, to be honest with you.
Sure.
And I'm just because like they're really slow on foot, and in some of those they can be a liability. You know what I mean? Like especially like a Reaper mission, like they could totally be a liability. But if you got things running around, they can actually be an asset because then they can shoot. They've got some range. They do have melee attacks and stuff like that. So they're not for nothing. But I was mostly worried about the
beauty of the
Argonauts.
Old Guard, because Swift as the Wind is just so good. And I think it's definitely a shortcut people can take to really strong lists in general this season is having move 3 combo with a ally that gives plus a bunch of movement. So like Soulblight Gravelords with a Flesh Eater Quartz ally, something like that. Yeah, I found my Old Guard was really, really helpful at sort of getting the Arcanaut Company around. And then the key with the shooting, I thought, was only shoot if you have to. Always be moving with them, because really their role is to be weirdly hard to kill for their points. They're 50 points each, and they've got 12 wounds, right?
Yeah.
That's just it's just a slog for your opponent. And so, and there's really not a lot of things that can kill them in one hit. Because even though they're toughness 3, 12 is just a lot of dice pips, You know, there's fighters out there that even if they roll all hits, you know, they have to have at least 2 crits in there, or else they're just not going to be able to count that high. And so I think that was what was good about them. They weren't flawless, you know. I mean, in my final match against Justin, he positioned a netter to be in the way so that they wouldn't be able to get to the final objective. Like 2 of them just had no chance. They couldn't cross the board in time. So that was a pretty big, you know, disaster where if those 2 had had movement 4, they might have been able to get to the objective in time because they would have been running for so many more rounds.
Yeah.
So there are flaws to the dwarves, certainly, but you know, their pound for pound.
To every list.
Yeah, exactly. Their pound for pound surviving power is just really strong, and so if they can survive while you run around with your 2 big scary things, then that's really solid.
Yeah, so just your little tournament recap. You had a major victory your first round. You had a minor victory against Jason. We'll talk about your guys' matchup after we talk about Jason's list, because I think we need a little bit of more context there. Minor victory over against Jason, and then you had another major victory in the third round against Andy and his Beasts of Chaos. And then you had, unfortunately, a major loss against Justin. But, man, that game was so close there at the end. And so you did you had some very solid wins in there, which is, I think, the difference. You ended up with 55 battle points. Jason ended up with 65 at number 2. And I think it's just that the way that last game went, you know what I mean? Jason had a very strong game, and then you had a very tough game. So
we'll have plenty to talk about when we get to Justin's list, but I think his list is very well set up to fight, you know, lists like mine, where basically let's not spoil it. We'll wait till we get to Justin. Let's talk about Jason's list.
Yeah. All right. So Jason, you took number 2 in the tournament. You your only loss that you had was against Dan, actually. Yep. So why don't you walk us through your list?
Yeah. So my list was called Out for a Stroll with the Pet Geist, and it was Flesh Eater Courts. I had the it was themed. I had the Abhorrent Ghoul King, who was out walking his Terrorgeist, and he had his bodyguard there with the Crypt Horror and his entourage with 5 Crypt Ghouls that were there with him. I actually changed my list right at the last minute before coming to the tournament. I did have an Abhorrent Ghoul King, a Terrorgeist, a Crypt Flayer, and I dropped a Ghoul so that I could fit the points in. But at the last minute, I decided I wanted to play a little differently, so I dropped the Flayer for a Horror and added an additional Ghoul to have additional bodies in there to see how that would play. My goal coming into this tournament was to learn how monsters work in 2.0. And it worked pretty well for me. The Terrorgeist was absolutely the star of the show for all of my matches that I won. The Ghoul King and the Crypt Horror did exactly what I thought they would do. The Crypt Horror the Crypt Horror stayed very close to the Ghoul King, and I used the double, once again doubles, right? They're so easy to come by. Chosen of the King to give him 2 additional attacks until the end of its activation. So he was swinging with 6 swings at times, and actually one time I got off the quad Stir of Black Hunger from the Ghoul King and Chosen of the King from the Crypt Horror, so he was swinging with just a ton. He was swinging with 7 swings on twice on an activation, which was that's just brutal to hit with when you're swinging with 7 and you're doing strength 4 and you're doing 2s and 4s against something. So the Crypt Horror did come in and pack a punch at times, and that helped. But really, it was focused on the doubles and the triples, because the double for the Chosen the King. Typical doubles you would think of that could let things kind of move around a little bit more. And then the thing I used the most the entire tournament, except in Dan's match, was the generic monster triple, the Dragon Maw, that lets the Terrorgeist grab any enemy model within 6 inches, pick them up, put them anywhere else on the model within 1 inch, and then roll a dice, and for every 4+, you're doing 3 damage to it.
It's so good.
It's so
good.
And the reason it's so good is you can yank people off of objectives and place them all the way on the other side of the 5.5-inch base of the Terrorgeist. So I could grab somebody who's 6 inches away on one side, move them 6 inches, move them another 5.5 inches, and another inch. I mean, just throwing them completely on the other side of an engagement that's going on. And the way the rules are written right now, you can yank them out of engagements as well.
Yeah.
So I think that my opinion, I think it's going to get nerfed. I think they're going to do some tweaking, like, if they're not engaged or something like that, because it felt overly powerful when I was playing this tournament.
I agree. I think grab and maw is a big part of why people are up in arms about monsters in general around the Warcry community.
Much. And from someone who played it at the tournament, it's just, I mean, that's how I won the Stormcast, right? We burned it to the last objective. I moved to my Terrorgeist once to the center of the map, and then I just kept spinning my wild dice to get a triple, and it is not hard to get a triple.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
I kept spinning wild dice for a triple, and then it was my turn. He would just yank one of his Vindicators.
Vindictors.
He would just yank one and throw him on the complete other side of the base so that he would be out of the buff of the leader.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it was just the whole time. I just played it that way. But the ghouls were really useful. I did not use them to attack. I used them just to be fence posts in all of the matches I played.
Yeah,
Yep.
so that sounds like the Argonaut kind of similar thing, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, they have a movement of 5, which is a good movement.
Wow, that is a very good movement.
It is a good movement in this game. So you can do a lot if you don't look at them as a actual attack and use them as board control. 5 movement is very good.
Hey, I'll have you know, during one round, my dwarves had a movement of 9. So
there you go. Movement's important.
Do you think the Dragon and Maul ability, if it were a quad, that would make it better?
You mean more balanced?
Yeah.
I think so.
Or does it need to actually you can't do it with her engaged or?
Well, so here's the thing, right? The fact that it moves you, is like the number one thing. But then don't forget, it does 3 damage for every roll.
Yeah.
On top of that,
right,
so it is just it is overly powerful for a triple.
And it might be
there's
a little
just
bit
too many
better
sides of fries.
What's that?
What'd you say?
You get the sandwich, and you get a side of fries,
exactly.
and you get the condiments where you can pull it out of combat. It's just like there's too many pieces to this value meal.
It is, and the thing about monsters, right, is they get 3 activations, but you can only do one thing per activation, but you can also do an ability. So I would move and then use my triple to then move you and still do damage, and now you're right next to me. So that on my next activation, I'm hitting you full power.
Yeah.
It's too powerful for a triple.
I
My
wonder
opinion is
if
it should be a quad.
it would also be better that instead of setting them up anywhere an inch away, which is if you're pulling them off an objective, you're going to be putting them literally on the other side of your dinner plate base that you have.
Yeah.
I wonder if it'd be better if it's okay, you can move them up to 6 inches, right? So choose a unit that's within 6 inches. You can move them up to 6 inches, so that
I like
that.
Know, that's
so
not
you're
a bad
still at least on
too.
the same side of the monster. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Instead of being all the way on the other side. So
it's interesting. It's not the only ability in the game where you can remove your thing from the battlefield and set them up within one. I think the Night Haunt have an ability like that. So I think they were probably looking for something that was a little more similar, but we'll see what happens as it gets more game time.
I mean, it's a very thematic ability.
Oh, totally.
This monster grabbing you and dragging you off. I mean, it's amazing, and it's a great ability. Incentivizes monsters, but
it's kind of like what's the universal quad called? Rampage.
Yeah, Rampage.
Yeah,
it's
just
kind of
so
like
much
that.
better
It's like
than everything else.
It's so better than everything. Like I would
Yeah.
never even think about using the Terrorgeist's natural triples and quads.
Right.
I would just always do Dragon Maw.
Yeah.
And I think that they maybe miscalculated on the anti-monster abilities too, because I never even considered them. I read them before our game.
Yep.
Once I saw, okay, I know I'm against Jason, I know I'm playing the Terrorgeist, I better reread these monster abilities. In game, never once thought about it. I always, and even Onslaught, which is not, it's a good, the universal ability Onslaught is a solid ability, but it's not
Right.
anything to write home about. It was so many miles ahead better than the anti-monster abilities because you're always better off trying to chunk it down another
Totally.
bracket than you are. It's just complete trash trying to waste dice,
Yeah, totally.
maybe giving it -1 movement. It's got 10 movement. It doesn't care if it only
Yeah.
has 9 movement, right?
I will say that several of my games, it got knocked down pretty far. I think at one point I got all the way to the bottom of the track and I rolled like four sixes, but it did 4 points of damage, right? So
Yeah, that's right.
because it's all the way at the bottom of its
Yeah,
track.
yeah.
But I would absolutely
Was
agree
I
with you,
the only
Dan.
one
I
to
think,
kill it?
Yes, and I think the reason, well, and there was a strategic reason for that, right? It was
Right.
blocking something.
Yeah.
It served a different purpose in our game than I did on the other games. But I would say watching people have to deal with my Terrorgeist this tournament, I think the answer to a monster is to just wail on it, to get it down on its track. Because if you try to ignore it and run away from it and leave it up on its track, it's just too much of a threat to stay on the board like that.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I think the
And
only
they're not
time
hard
you
to
can
hit.
get away, yeah, exactly. The only time you can get away with running away is when if there's a ton of terrain on the board,
Yeah.
and I think that's the only time.
Yep. And that happened a few times. I couldn't move it to engage because I couldn't move far enough to clear a wall. But then I just used the triple and yanked you back to me from
Right.
being 6 inches
Oh
away.
man, what a nightmare! Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, that was my list. It was a fun
Very
list.
good. So the winner that we had, and by the way, congratulations to you two. I think you both ended up getting some prizes, right, for your placings.
I got more dwarves. I played
Nice.
dwarves and then got more
Yeah.
dwarves as a prize.
Yeah, I got some ogres.
That's good. That's
was
good.
fun.
So the first place, the best of the rest of us, was Justin Orton. He won in Adepticon with his Thundercats list. Am I right about that, Dan?
Yes, 4
Yep.
Thundercats.
Yep. Which is the Thundercats
then-
are basically the evocators on Dracolines.
And then at Gen
Yeah.
Con, when he didn't win and he came 2-2 with his dwarves, apparently he got in a lot of trouble with his family for not winning after creating
Oh,
an
really?
expectation to win every
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
I mean, not like real trouble, but you know what I mean. Apparently they gave him a lot of grief. This list is beautiful, though. Do you want to read it out, or should I?
Why don't you go ahead? Yeah.
All right. So he went with the leader being a Moon Clan boss. It's the cheapest one you can do. It's 110 points, which is all it needs to do. The first
Right,
ally
exactly.
is an Orc Gore Grunta boss with the Pig Iron Choppa. That's the
Yeah.
range one instead of the range 2. A lot of people love range 2. I love range 2, but here it makes sense to have range 1 because you actually want them attacking the Gore Grunta boss because it has 40 wounds.
Yeah.
He's got
It's
another
300
ally
points, though.
300 points
Yeah. That's a
of
good
just
chunk.
the thickest pork that your opponent will ever be able to try to fight through. Then finally, there's a third ally hero, third hero, this second ally, Orc Mega Boss,
Yeah.
only 224 points. 25 points for an incredible amount of combat power. Yes, it struggles to get into combat, you would think, because of the movement 3, except as we'll explain later, it actually is one of the fastest units in the entire game. Then it has a Thrall, which is a Rockgut Troggoth. Justin
Yep.
swore by this guy. 185 points is pretty cheap for that wound pool. Then
Well, and
he played
heals.
and he heals. Yep, really hard to kill. And then a Brugit and 2 Stabas with nets. And the
Yeah.
Brugit, his ability is to give +3 attacks to any of his friends.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of combos going on in here.
Tons.
Which is good. And so, I mean, if you put that Brugit next to that Mega Boss, it's going to delete whatever is in front of it.
And he was
You
actually
know.
saying he didn't like putting the Brugit on the Mega Boss because the
It's
Mega
almost
Boss
too
kills
much.
everything anyway.
Yeah, it's overkill.
So you get more value putting the Brugit on either the Trogoth or the Gorgrunta boss, which
Yeah.
I thought was really interesting and just a good sort of maximizing of resources. But yeah, just the Brugit, the Stabas, so those nets are only doubles. Like we said, you always have a double. The Brugit has that combo ability is also on a double. You always have a double. The Orc Mega Boss, the reason I say it's the fastest unit in the game, that's a little facetious, but it has Wah, which
Yeah.
moves everybody around it real fast. It gets teleported forward only 3 inches, but still just a free movement forward using a reaction from either the Brugit or one of the Stabas. So you can do very dirty stuff with the Brugit and either the Trogoth or the Mega Boss or the Gorgrunta boss, where you basically, it's in place at the start of the round. They come onto the objective. Your Brugit is there. Your Brugit says, "Hey, buddy, come over and fight them." And then that only takes one of its actions, and then it spends its other action activating, maybe attacking once, maybe not, but mostly using the ability to pump up their attacks. And then he's now teleported his big scary fighter into combat, and he's given it plus attacks, all without spending an activation on that big scary fighter. Now, when it does attack, it just blows up whatever it hits, and it was starting from like across the board, which is really
Right.
wild. And then also the Mega Boss and the Gorgrunta boss have this ability called Charge. Every Ironjaw has it. It's the best. It's the best double in the game, other than Nets. Um, a few groups have it, like one of the Stormcast chambers has it. Slaanesh has it. So it's not that rare, but it is the best double. It's the one where if there's a fighter within 6 inches of you, you get a free movement, and you have to get closer to that fighter than you were before. And so it's, just 3 more inches of movement on a double for your Mega Boss who really needs it, right? And so it meant that Mega Boss move 3 is just completely false. It's move 6. That's just what it is. It's a move 6 fighter with just 1 million damage and toughness 5 for 225 points. It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
So,
the interesting
I'm
thing
impressed.
about.
Oh, go on.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to say the interesting thing about this list to me is that there's combos for days in here.
Yep.
Like if he can't combo with one, he can combo with another, and they're just, it's constantly feeding off of each other. And I think that this goes to speak so highly of Justin and his list, just because he's really thinking about the synergies that the warband can do. And if for some reason they have to go separate ways on different parts of the board, well, there's all these different things that's supporting itself throughout the list. So he's got some heavy hitters that can take care of Stormcast and Dragon Ogres and Ogreoid Myrmidons if they come across all of those things, and even a Terrorgeist, right? Like, I would not want my Terrorgeist to be charged with a Gorgrunta and a Mega Boss. Like, that would be not a good day for that Terrorgeist monster, So he's got the violence that he needs. He's got the movement that he needs, and then there's like some silly little combos that are, like with that Brugit. All of a sudden, like, you've got little guys that you don't expect will do much, like having like 5 attacks all of a sudden, and probably a 1 in 3 profile. Well, 5 attacks, like that's 10 wounds maybe, potentially.
I
Yeah.
also thought it was really interesting. He built his list to attack opposing hammers, right? He's got multiple netters that lock big guys down. Um, his mega boss is basically the mega boss specializes in taking down big expensive things that move faster than it but have the same like attack stats as it does but cost 50 points more. So um, I think there's a big push pull towards, do you want your expensive things to be expensive things that are really good at hunting down cheap stuff like my Mizzen Master,
Hmm.
or do you want expensive things that are really good at fighting other expensive things? And
Yeah, that's
I
a great
think
point.
that the correct answer will kind of change based on who your opponent is, right? It could change round to round even, but I think
Yeah.
he definitely got rewarded for having expensive things that could fight other expensive things.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think Justin shows us how a really strategic mind approaches a competitive Warcry event, right? Because he's not just thinking, okay, I need to have an answer for Stormcast, I need to have an answer for zombies, I need to have an answer for, like he's gone down that list, and you can see it in his list building. But it's also the way that he's put his Hammer Dagger Shield together. He's looked at the different missions and said, okay, ideally, like, I want this unit, this model to be responding to the other person's dagger, the other person's shield, the other person's, and how do I make sure that that one does that? Okay, I'm going to put it in this deployment group, right? So he's thinking about this tournament top to bottom. Like, I have no doubt he studied the pack before, like, as it came out, and said, okay, where should I put my units based on the missions? And so you saw like guys like JJ, even guys like Eric, they just spread out their stuff, which is not a bad. That's not a bad strategy, and I'm not saying that I fault them for it. But when I look at Justin's list, I say this is a man who was approaching this very strategically, very strategically.
Yep, I think, and it's you can't underestimate having such a heavy hitter with huge hit points. But you play smart with it too, because you can get that locked into the wrong combats and into the wrong places, and then it stays out of the game, even if it can kill everything that gets in front of it. So he put a strategic list together, and he played it well.
Yep, definitely.
The one, if you're worried about this list, if you kind of have a Chicken Little mindset, neither of you really do, but I can imagine some listeners would. I think the one real weakness to this list is it has a tough time dealing with terrain. It really does. If you can leverage terrain really well, like the Orc Mega Boss at 3 inches of movement, I know it has that double, but like it doesn't climb well because of the 3-inch move, right? You kind of need 4 inches of movement to climb 3-inch things effectively. So, and then of course the Gore-Grunta boss is 300 points of your list that can't get onto terrain at all.
Right.
So, having a game plan that really relies on terrain, I think, will put you in a really good place if you're playing against a list like this. Now that said, I think you may play against a lot of people who take this shell and just have different allies. Like someone already has won a tournament in Oslo, Norway, where instead of the Gore-Grunta boss, basically they set it up exactly the same, but their allies, one of them was a ogre tyrant, right, for just like a totally different flavor that can, do.
Yeah, Tyrant's great.
Yeah, Ogre Tyrants are really scary. I don't think it's better than this list, but it might be just as good. I just think there's a lot you can play with Destruction now that they've cracked this code of you just use the cheap Gitz and then you bring in the biggest, stompiest, scariest allies from across Destruction that you can.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah, there's a lot to like there, but I would say playing against it, definitely lean on terrain a lot. And I think next month when we talk about monsters, there's going to be even more to talk about with terrain. So I think if you're a aspiring tournament organizer, I also think that terrain is maybe the hottest topic that should be in your head
Yeah.
right now. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe that's our thing is monsters and terrain, right? Because I think they go hand in hand there. So, but listen, we made it through the Nova list. I think there's a lot of great discussion here. I think hopefully you as the listeners, you picked up on some things that maybe you didn't think about before. And given that this is our first 2.0 list, I actually thought that the people did pretty good crafting them without much play time in how the new points worked and how the new abilities and things worked.
Yeah.
I'm really curious to see how this is going to end up, in 6 months and a year, like when people start getting more things under their belt and where we're going with it. So. But thank you guys for joining us tonight, and thank you for the listeners for sticking with us for 2 hours tonight. I know Jason's probably
Real
freaking out
marathon.
about
Yeah.
we went so long. But we did, and I think we had a great discussion. So if you liked the show tonight, please share it with your friends. Please put it out there so that other people who love Warcry as well can hear this, because I think that this is a great kickoff for 2.0 as we move forward. So thank you so much to everybody, and just keep rolling those dice. Have a great night.
See ya.